Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I want to thank everyone for spending their time with us today. Today's webinar is going to walk through one of the biggest opportunities that we see with new clients, and that is aligning their forecasting and budgeting processes with spend management to draw insights and how to better manage their program. So the name of the webinar is Drivers of Spend Across Remediation Portfolios. And for those of you that don't know me, my name is Michael Douglas, and I'll be the host for today. Just a couple logistical items before we get going. Today's webinar is being recorded and will automatically be sent out to everyone who is attending live or even registered. That'll come out by the end of today. All callers are default muted, so we encourage you that if you have questions, please ask those in the questions panel in the GoToWebinar control panel. And then also, time permitting, we'll answer as many questions as possible live at the end. We do end on time, so we can always follow up through email if there's anything that we don't get to. Many of you today on the call are already either customers or users of ENFOS, but some aren't. So I'll just provide a very brief introduction. And then if you're interested in continuing the conversation, both mine and Evan Auger's contact information will be on the very last slide. So ENFOS is a cloud software as a service, and we help organizations manage all of their project, financial, and environmental data around their environmental liability projects in one place. Next slide, please. Our customers, many shown on the screen here, use ENFOS to collaborate with their strategic partners, environmental consultants, on projects regarding scope, schedule, and budget. This ensures a single version of the truth. Everything's done in ENFOS. Next slide, please. So a core component of our value proposition is helping our customers manage the entire reserve process throughout its entire life cycle by connecting the reserve and budgeting process with spend management inside of a project management framework. And then we integrate on the back end with systems such as SAP, Ariba, Oracle, and Power BI to streamline these business processes. We also provide a non-invasive environmental technical data management approach. This allows our customers to not only own but possess their environmental data. And both of these will be very important to remember as we get into the presentation for today. And again, if you're new to us, we'll talk about some ways at the end in order to get connected. So with that, I want to introduce our two speakers. Roger Well is a co-founder of ENFOS, currently serves as our president and chief operating officer. He has over 33 years of experience in the field, having started his career as an environmental consultant. Roger has a bachelor's and a master's in geology in addition to an MBA. And then also presenting today is George Burnett. George is our director of technical services. He's been with ENFOS for over 7 years now, and he helps bridge the gap between the business and the technical sides of ENFOS. He also manages our support in quality assurance processes, and he's one of our resident business intelligence experts. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Roger, and he'll be kicking off today's presentation.
Great, thank you, Mike. And thank you to George for preparing and participating, and also two other folks, Jonathan Sedlacek and Christina Kilberry from ENFOS, were involved in our data preparation and analysis and visualizations. So today's agenda, we're going to start out with an introduction to spend management for remediation programs. And we know how important cost control, spend management, and cash flow. We know how important those aspects of running your business is. So today we're going to devote our hour just to that. With analyzing data, particularly spend data, you really can't do that effectively and efficiently without enterprise business intelligence. So we're going to be talking about the ENFOS business intelligence capability and showing you several examples created using ENFOS BI and Power BI. And those will be demonstrations. And then we also have some other use cases that we're going to be sharing as examples on work that we're doing with customers in this area. In terms of what you'll learn today, spend management key concepts and information management practices, what it takes to implement business intelligence across the portfolio, differences between composition and value of spend, two very distinctive areas in terms of spend management and spend analysis. We'll go over several metrics and analysis techniques to analyze spend data, and then how dashboards can be used to manage and inform remediation programs. So let's start with some definitions. And this is our take on defining this overall category of remediation spend. And within remediation spend, we've got multiple subcategories listed here in the first column called typical categories. There's the remediation reserve or provision, another name for it. There's the spending against an actual reserved liability. There's asset retirement obligation that can involve both remediation spend as well as decommissioning spend. There are operating expenses. Some organizations call it an OPEX or operating expense or non-reserved spend. And in the remediation arena, this typically involves work activities like emergency response, initial abatement, environmental due diligence, and sometimes first year site characterization and remediation costs until such time a reserve has been taken for that liability. There's also legal and capital, even though those are generally at a much less level of spend. So those are the major categories that we're talking about today. The first two, remediation reserve and asset retirement obligations in the US follow accounting standards. So for provisioning, it's ASC 410-30, and then for the ARO, it's 410-20. And for international non-US based businesses, they're following IFRS, and the standard is IAS 37. And within those bodies of knowledge and standards, there are very specific requirements that organizations follow and that their auditors hold those organizations accountable for. There's also government accounting standards as well for both categories of remediation and asset retirement obligations. Spend, so the actual cost, actual spend comes into play in all of these from a performance management or a performance baseline standpoint. So actual costs, and sometimes I'll just say actual spend, that may, but most times does, reduce the liability for the obligation that's already been recognized. What we'll talk about a little bit later is it's usually not a dollar for dollar, and there are many reasons why that's the case, but it is a metric that can be monitored. The next column would be the cost objects or the collectors. And different companies use different terms. A lot of times this is based on the accounting software they're using, and which is the ERP system. But we'll start out with, we talk about a remediation site, and some remediation sites will have one and only one area of concern, and other larger facilities or properties or sites in general, some of these mega sites, they'll have multiple areas of concern. You may call them operating units, you might have different terminology, but many of these very large sites are broken down into these AOCs, areas of concern, primarily to be able to manage more effectively. It's an organizing principle. WBS, work breakdown structure elements, internal order numbers, AFE numbers, cost centers. These all basically refer to the primary collector of the remediation spend. And if I'm collecting remediation spend on these objects, I also then generally have some kind of a financial plan on the front end. That's a life cycle forecast, generally associated with multiple years of activity that we're going to be performing to investigate, design, remediate, and close the site. The next column is classification and taxonomy. This is also a very important element in being able to do enterprise-wide spend management and analytics. The key there is a work breakdown structure. And this would be a uniform set of project details based on a multi-level hierarchy. We're going to explore that in a little bit more detail. And then there are all kinds of accounting details. This is the coding that is typically required for the ERP systems for accounting. We call those general ledger parameters. And then finally, the last column is really your spend baselines. So if I'm spending money to remediate or investigate a site, there are front-end activities that are necessary, and they start with financial plans, but they also include work proposals from the supply chain, statements of work, contracts and purchase orders. These fall under work commitments, project management plans. Now we're getting into the project management granularity associated with tasks and subtasks necessary to execute some part of the remediation work. And then we have other types of artifacts like billable rates and rate schedules, and then percent complete and earned value methodologies to analyze progress and cost variance. So the practice of spend management, there's a definition here, but it's a couple of the key words here is that it's a continuous management process, and it contains many types of activities: forecasting, work committing, work controlling, analyzing, and ultimately improving the way an organization spends money. This happens in a lot of different types of cost centers, not just remediation, but remediation, as we know, for all those of you on the call that have been in this field, there are a lot of nuances, and those nuances are created by the complexity and the uncertainty of this type of work. On the very left-hand side of the graphic, you can see the external factors. And these are kind of large categories, but certainly we have environmental regulations, we have accounting standards that I mentioned, you have property owners, not only of the property of interest, but also the surrounding properties within a certain radius of the contaminated site, and then the community at large. Everything to the right of that is internal. So we have business functions that all ultimately support the remediation cost center within an organization. They could be IT, finance, real estate, legal, and so on. The corporation then is, or organization, if it's a government, is generally set up to manage multiple remediation sites throughout their life cycle. And most of that work is outsourced to consultants, subcontractors, and labs, and outside legal. So drilling down a little bit more into the uncertainties in remediation, this ultimately ties back to the business model and the data model that's necessary to do spend management, but they tie into these. This is like, why is remediation different? Why does it require unique management systems to plan and execute that work? And I won't go through all of these. Some of the big ones are certainly the site heterogeneity, for sure, because that's the geology and hydrogeology and the complexities associated with fate and transport. Contaminant complexity and persistence, regulations, and long life cycles. There are many others that are listed there, and they all go into the fact that in this business of remediation, we have all these unique factors. And so it's different. It's a different type of work than construction. It's a different type of work than maintenance. It has its own unique elements, its own unique drivers, and therefore, when we talk about spend management for this business, we're going to have some very unique characteristics. Okay, I'm going to jump into data structures and organizing principles when it comes to spend management. On the left-hand side, this is a depiction of a organizational project hierarchy. The owner would be an ENFOS customer, right? Or ENFOS future customer. This hierarchy structure is configured to precisely mimic the customer's organizational structure on sites and areas of concern. It can have as many levels as you need based on your own design requirements. The levels are named precisely what you want to name them. But ultimately, at the very bottom of this, you have independent and unique areas of concern. That is the remediation entity that's part of the portfolio. So in this example, we have site A, and it has two AOCs, AOC A and AOC B. These have their own life cycle. So moving to the right-hand side, you can see that if that's AOC A, the project, it's going to move through the pretty traditional or classical remediation phases, from assessment all the way through closure. And that level within the work breakdown structure is level 1, and that's the phase level. So I've got the AOC, which is the project, and now I can define my planned spend and my actual spend into these phase categories. That project detail hierarchy goes down to 4 levels. And again, it's optional, it's based on the business needs. But what we're doing is we're defining not only the organizational hierarchy, but the project detail hierarchy as a work breakdown structure. And we'll get into how this leads to effective spend management. So level 2 might be a work activity or a subphase. There's a level 3 that might be a cost element level, and then level 4 a component. And you see an example here. So the phase in the example is remedial action. The activity is planning and permitting. The cost element is regulatory meetings, and then the cost components are made up of direct labor, indirect labor, travel costs, and subcontractor costs. Those all then roll up to each successive parent level to where they ultimately roll up to the AOC as a whole, and then all the AOCs on a given site roll up to that site level. And then from there, it moves up the organization into consolidation and roll-ups for higher levels within the organizational hierarchy. Now that the site and AOC hierarchy has been established and the work breakdown structure detail hierarchy has been established, we then move within the data model and the workflow to link all of the financial management key processes. So that's forecasting and budgeting, vendor proposals, and statements of work and cost estimates, committing to those as contracts or purchase or service orders, again, depending on terminology, and then ultimately the actual costs, invoices and cost recovery. So that linkage of the core financial processes in one systematic methodology and digital platform ties it all together. Okay? That is the basis of the organizing principles and data model to be able to effectively manage and control spend. All right, now we're going to move into some use cases around spend management. So we have here three broad categories. What are we buying, forecast versus spend, and the value of spend. I've listed here, again, some of the major use cases for each one of those categories. So what are we buying? This is usually for procurement optimization, supplier information, rate schedule information, quantities, unit rates, numbers of assigned sites and projects, and so on. This provides spend visibility into both categorization and composition. So categorization ties back to one of my earlier slides that talked about, is it a reserve project? Is it an ARO project? Is it an operating expense or non-reserve type project? That's categorization. Also, categorization is cost by phase of work and that work breakdown structure detail. That's categorization. Whereas composition is more based on the bottom level, level 4, that we talked about, that gets into your basic cost accounting elements like labor, equipment, material, subcontractors, utilities, and so on, right? That's composition of spend. And then there's spend verification and compliance, right? Making sure that delegations of authority are in place, all the way from the approved work commitment to a service entry, to a % complete, to an invoice. The middle factor is an area we get asked about a lot, which is how can we improve our performance around forecast versus spend? And they're really trying to answer the question, how accurate is our forecasting, so that we can get better at forecasting. We also have AOC-based measures, and we have scope, cost, and timing-based measures, and we have some examples to flesh out in those. So that's forecast versus spend. It's about having the right baselines so that when our actual costs come in, we can line them up in that organizational hierarchy. That's the AOC. And we can line them up in terms of our work breakdown structure. If you think about that, that's our life cycle phases and then the details underneath that. That's scope, cost, and then timing is my future year forecasts out into the future. The third column is value of spend. And we really have two major areas, and I have the special area. So there's financial efficiency measures. So for every dollar we're spending, what are we getting out of that, right? Outcome measures are, when we're spending money, are we progressing our sites along the life cycle continuum? Are we reducing risk? And are we generating our KPIs associated with that spend, such as site closures or moving sites into long-term monitoring, right? And then there's the special category of spend per unit measures. And for the most part, there's two tiers of that. The basic tier is the easy stuff. I can get spend per unit on things like all of my labor rates, right? Very easily if I'm tracking and managing that in my proposals and in my invoices. Spend by by vendor company, right? The vendor company is a unit in that case. Those are pretty much low-hanging fruit. The more difficult ones have to do with risk reduction, contaminant concentration level reduction, and some maybe contaminant mass type reductions. So we're going to spend a little time talking about that as well. All right, everybody I think knows that ENFOS is a software company that specializes in remediation and decommissioning. And what we have done recently is we have launched embedded dashboards and business intelligence capability directly into the application. And for those of you that are ENFOS customers or consultant users, you will find this section under the reporting module, and it's called dashboards. George is going to do some demonstrations here in a couple minutes. This has not been enabled yet for each customer. Every customer is kind of doing this on a scheduled basis based on their needs and the timing that they need to authorize and enable that. But it is available to all existing customers. On top of that, ENFOS has designed and built half a dozen or so curated dashboards that are specific to the remediation industry. All customers are going to get these at no additional charge. They're ENFOS curated dashboards. We want users to use them and get value out of them. Additionally, though, every customer can do their own custom reporting, visualization, and dashboard building and publish those directly into their ENFOS application. So if you need more analysis and insight type tools, those can be designed, built, and published directly into ENFOS. With that, I'm going to hand it off to George, who is our Director of Technical Services, as Mike said, and he is also our lead business intelligence subject matter expert. So with that, George, I'll hand it to you.
Thanks, Roger. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah, so this is a high-level kind of technical summary of BI using ENFOS. In the top left corner, we have the ENFOS production database, where for our customers, this is where all of their data within ENFOS is stored. On a nightly basis, we send that through a process called denormalization, which converts the hundreds and hundreds of tables that ENFOS is built with into user-friendly OData API. That OData API is represented by the schema on the top right-hand side of the slide. We take all of the tables in ENFOS and boil those down into about 30 user-friendly tables that are BI compatible. We have customers using the OData feed with Power BI, Tableau, Excel, Tibco, Spotfire, as well as some other programs, as well as directly through R and Python. But what it boils down to is we're able to take your production data and make it very, very compatible with all the common BI tools. Once you've decided your analytics platform choice, you can either consume the dashboards and reports that have been built outside of ENFOS through your preferred platform. Maybe that's Power BI through Teams or through Tableau directly. Or if you're using Power BI, you can have ENFOS publish those to our instance of Power BI Cloud, and we can embed those directly into the ENFOS application with a couple examples seen in the lower left corner. The great thing about embedding the dashboards directly into ENFOS is that we can apply the user's hierarchy access, which is their sites and projects that they have access to through their account, as well as their ENFOS user privileges. So if they have access to financial information, but not compliance information, we can see that applied to the dashboard where they're only going to see data that they're supposed to have access to, which cannot be done when consuming dashboards outside of ENFOS.
Okay.
Roger, you can jump to the next slide.
Yes. And I'm going to give you the presenter, George.
Awesome.
There's a lot of names on here. Do you have it, George?
I don't. Let me try to take it. There we go. All right. So I'm going to share my screen, and you should be seeing ENFOS production. This is, I do want to state, fictitious data. All of the sites and projects in this system are based on the US state capitals and UNESCO World Heritage sites. So you'll see some interesting names in here, like the Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. But like Roger mentioned, we have a new module within ENFOS called Reporting Dashboards. This does not eliminate the 100 standard reports that ENFOS already offers in the reporting module. This is a new addition to our existing reporting capabilities. In this system, I have published 5 dashboards already: user administration, purchase order analysis, plan adjustments, current year plans, and a spend analysis. I'm going to be taking a look at 2 of these dashboards that I've identified as favorites. These dashboards are configured to refresh at 5:30 a.m. Pacific time. So these are up to date as of midnight the night prior. My first one, purchase order analysis. And for our existing customers on the webinar, this is one that you're going to see published by ENFOS very shortly and enabled by your system administrators for your consumption. But as we can see, I have a purchase order dashboard here. I'm going to zoom in just a touch so it's easier for everyone to see.
Looks good, George.
Thank you. And this is interactive. So this is Power BI that's been embedded directly within the ENFOS application. I can see that across my entire portfolio, I currently have 42 open purchase orders. Based on my expense type that I've selected for environmental obligations, 37 of them are in my current selection. I can see the detail of all of these at a high level, up at my site level, or I can break down by different levels. So I can see it by vendor, by my GL accounting codes, by projects, by their parent site, or I can go in and break it down like a pivot table and see it by vendor, project number, and PO to whatever detail I design this as a BI developer. So we can see we've got our PO approved amount for PO ending in 604, that was $1,200. We've approved $825, and that gives us an open PO amount of $375 and a PO percent complete of 69%. I can see when I clicked on that PO, the rest of my dashboard updated. So we can see our target here, our 1.2K PO is our gauge target. We're at $825 of that. So the great thing about these is that these are not static reports. You can't use these to change data that exist in ENFOS, but you can use these to query your ENFOS data on demand. So as a project manager, I could go in and choose to view this dashboard for only my portfolio, or a specific site or project within my portfolio, for a specific vendor, and I can do all that with slicers. Now this one happens to be designed to have some hierarchy slicers as well as PO company and PO status slicers, but that's not the only way slicers can be used. Any of the fields available in the OData feed can be used to create slicers or to pre-filter the data behind the dashboard. I can also see here that this supports multi-tabular reports. So I'm on our Open POs tab. I can jump over to our proposals by top 5, select my proper expense type, and if I want to go full screen focus mode, I can expand any of my visuals to get a more detailed view of them. Now, Roger was talking about procurement optimization, and this is a dashboard that can be a very high level view to help aid that process. So we're looking at proposal amounts by vendor and by proposal type, whether it was an initial proposal or a change order. Now this data is all fictitious. We can see ENFOS is a vendor in this system, and we can see we had 2 proposals for a sum of $51,000 and 1 change order for a sum of $3,000. So we can start to see who our more accurate suppliers are for the work that we're doing. Who's issuing the most change orders? Who's issuing the highest value change orders? Can that influence which vendors and suppliers I'm selecting when looking at sites and projects with work that need to be done? We can also start to do things like look at our open POs by top 5, top 10. Our top visualization here is looking at the thousands of dollars we have in open PO commitments and what projects those are assigned to. And within those projects, what vendors is that work assigned to? So I can see in St. Paul, we have a 10K open PO for a non-co, and in our PFAS GW Remediation Unit 1, we have $34,000 open to ENFOS. Again, for every view, I have the option to define how I want to see this data. Maybe I only want to see things in a specific location or a specific site or a specific region or even a specific status. Maybe I only want to look at things that are in invoicing status and I don't need to see things that have been stopped or expired or pre-approved. This is all on demand.
Yep. One of the recent examples from a customer is at this time of year, they start looking at open PO amounts so that they can start communicating with their consultants on the amount of work and the dollar amount of work still to be completed this year and invoiced. So that's a very common use case for these, where work, it doesn't appear that work is getting completed and invoiced in the year that it was allocated for.
Absolutely, and the dashboards we're looking at today are fairly high level. These are starter dashboards for all of our customers to get them used to using the module and what they can do with it. But we have several customers that are already building things that are amazing on their own, where they are integrating the financial data with their laboratory data or their compliance data with the financial and the site phase data. And they're able to create these cross-functional, cross-departmental dashboards and start to make data-backed decisions on how to handle their sites and projects, both at a single project level and portfolio-wide. I've jumped over to another dashboard here that falls into the spend visibility category that Roger mentioned. And this one is looking at our approved spend. Again, fictitious data, but we have some different visualizations types here. We've got spend by phase, which is the top level of the WBS. I can see since 2016, what categories of work has my spend fallen into. The purple being monitoring, the orange being remediation O&M. Again, all of these are interactive, so I can highlight portions that I need to. I can identify things by clicking on them, and they're going to update other parts of my dashboard on demand. So maybe I only want to see spend from Planet Express. I can see this specific supplier spend, how it broke out through the years and what categories it applied to. That updates my matrix down below. I can see at the Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, all the way down to the project level, what that spend looked like broken out by year. Again, we can see different slicers that are available for this one, full hierarchy, which we try to build for all dashboards, since that's a primary way that users will delineate their views. But I could also go in and say, show me a specific company. Again, show me my invoice statuses, or even by invoice type. Maybe I only want to look at credit memos that I'm receiving back from vendor companies.
What this is actual spend here and all past years, and then it updates spend also in the current year. But the actual cost then can be added to the estimate to complete forecast to give you an estimate at completion value for the whole portfolio and for every individual project as well.
Yeah, and Roger, you mentioned this earlier, but I want to reiterate it. This is the OData feed, and your data can be self-serve, where if you have an internal BI team, you can build things on demand with them or yourself. We have some great remediation professionals doing that. Or you can use ENFOS. We do have a BI team that's here and ready to build things with you based on your specifications and needs. Last view that I want to take a look at is Power BI also supports mapping. So this one's going to take a second to load because it's loading a lot of data. But across all of this fictitious owner's data set, we can see spend by life-to-date spend by vendor. So if I zoom in on Virginia here, each one of the slices of this pie represents a different vendor company, and I can see what their base invoice amount spend is life to date. I can always, of course, go in and select a specific vendor from my legend, and it's going to highlight all that. Or I can come into my slicers and restrict it this way, and I can say, show me my Planet Express only, and that's going to update my dashboard to remove all the other colors. And this is going to show me my life to date spend for a specific vendor and where it occurred. So we're just scratching the surface in this demo on what we can do with your data through BI and through Power BI. The sky's the limit, and we'd love to work with all of you to figure out what you want to learn out of your data.
Great, thanks, George. George, you want to hand the presenter back to me, please?
Yes. All right, you should have it, Roger.
I can do this. And is my screen being shared, George?
Yes, it is.
All right. So that was an overview using embedded business intelligence within ENFOS and a couple of our curated dashboards around spend analysis. What I want to do now is jump into some projects that we're working on with customers that we have. The dashboards can't be published because they're custom. The first one is analyzing forecast versus spend. And I just want to briefly talk about the chart here, the table in the chart. So there was a methodology that we worked with to analyze forecast versus spend. And we went back 5 years, so to the beginning of 2018, and we looked at every individual area of concern in the portfolio. There were about 260 remediation sites in this portfolio. And this was done on individual AOCs for each site and then consolidated and rolled up. So back in 2018, there was a plan forecast for $125,000 for the year 2018. Also at that time, their 2019 projection was $50,000, their 2020 projection was $50,000, and their 2021 or 2022 was $50,000 and some change. And so we did a 5-year study, and we again went back every planning year and looked at the actual forecast for the current year plus 4 years. We then brought in the actual spend, since those years are over and the work was actually done, and then calculated a variance. This was also done in Power BI. The chart to the right shows an example of one AOC. It's actually the data from that 2018 forecast in the table to the left. The gray bar is the actual spend. That blue line was the forecast, the remediation forecast for 2018, 2019, 20, 21, and 22. So you can see it was significantly under forecasted. And then we did that for every year's annual reforecasting period, and plotted that data and analyzed that data. And we came up with a set of results that are interesting and not unexpected, because we did this analysis about 5 years ago for one of our user conferences, and the data is pretty consistent. So again, there's about 260 sites in this portfolio. So what you see on the left would be the year by year variance between forecast and spend for 5 different planning years: 2018, 19, 20, 21, and 22. The end result summarized for each year is on the right-hand side here. And this is really the insightful data. So the current year is year 0. The current year plus 1 is that year 1. And then there's current year plus 2, current year plus 3, and current year plus 4. So for these 5 different annual planning events, these are the average variances. So as you would expect, the current year, there's very little variance between forecast and spend. In fact, this is a very good variance for this company. They're doing a very good job of estimating their current year spend forecast. Year 1, though, current year plus 1, there is a negative variance of about 38%. So hard construction projects that are estimated typically have a plus or minus 5% variance as the range. So we're already well outside of that. This goes back into play on the uncertainties around remediation projects. Now, there are some other factors in there as well, such as policy and accounting and work commitment procedures. But you can see that in current year plus 1, over that 5-year horizon, the average variance was negative 38%. And from there, it gets worse, right? So current year plus 2, you're already talking minus 110%. Current year plus 3, minus 136. And current year plus 4, minus 281%. So those are pretty significant variances. And this information is being used by this customer of ours to determine why is that the case and what are the drivers around that. And so it's a very comprehensive analysis looking back 5 years in time. Now, I will point out a project that we have already completed using machine learning for forecasting. The machine learning model produced a 68% more accurate forecast than the human beings did that were responsible for managing a portfolio like this. And that only included financial information, right? Historical forecasts and historical costs. That model did not factor in site attributes, such as sensitive receptors, demographics, geology, hydrogeology, remedial technology, and so on. So this is ongoing research that ENFOS has in the machine learning area that will eventually be brought up as a commercial offering to support remediation management. I wanted to point that out, though. All right, so let me just take a step back. So we have these variances, and this is good information. It tells us something, but it's not the full story. So there's a methodology that ENFOS and many ENFOS customers use to help really tell the data story about individual sites and the portfolio as a whole. And starting at the upper left, it goes back to the organizational hierarchy structure. So when we have a site, an existing site that's already a reserve site, we've already done forecasting for it, as I mentioned, it can have one or more areas of concern. At some date boundary condition, though, a snapshot of the forecast data is made in ENFOS, and all known sites and all known areas of concern with their forecasts can be snapshotted so that now I can do performance baselines just against the base load liability through time. The base load liability, as you can see in the graph, typically goes down at some kind of a rate based on spending, right? It's usually not a dollar for dollar, because cash efficiency, if you're at a 1.0, is very, very good, not always feasible for early stage projects. But I can do a spending analysis just on my areas of concern that are in my base load liability. When we have new sites and we have new areas of concern from new discoveries, new spills, new incidents, the AOCs get tagged in ENFOS as an incremental area of concern remediation type. That means it was not included in the original baseline or base load. Through time, if you're getting new projects, new AOCs, and sometimes new sites brought into your portfolio, through time, those liabilities are going to grow at a faster rate because they're usually early stage. We have to do investigation and feasibility study and RI work, and those liabilities will grow through time. That's the incremental. When you sum those up in a given portfolio, many as a total liability on the right, it generally can look like a flat line. And if someone who's non-educated in the remediation world looks at a flat line, they think you're not doing your jobs effectively. You're spending all this money, but the reserve balance isn't going down at that rate, right? We have a metric called cash efficiency that our customers use to help them determine what's cash efficiency on their base load liabilities versus our incremental liabilities. Going down to the bottom, another important factor in spend management and spend analysis is pulling it all together. So I get new AOCs through time. That's my first column. I have base load areas and I have incremental areas. And if you're doing mergers and acquisitions, you might have acquired liabilities. You're tracking those as counts and in terms of dollars. Then every time we need to make a reforecast because of a trigger event or some other reason, that gets tagged during the financial planning and reforecasting process so that I've broken those changes out, which ultimately is going to drive my spend into reasons like this. These are examples. So things like PFAS, PFOA, regulatory, strategic changes, property use, operations driven, and different types of deferrals. So I wanted to point that out in terms of spend analysis. If you're not doing these things, you're not effectively telling the story to upper management and to the stakeholders at large. Other examples of spend analysis are shown here, and I'm also monitoring the time. Spend distribution by cost component is one of those tier one, pretty low hanging fruit, but it also informs you. This is actual data across many customers. 65% of spend is coming from labor, right? 13% on subs, 5 on equipment, 5 on lab, and so on. This informs procurement, it can inform performance, and many other factors. But if you're not collecting invoice detail to this level, you can't get to this. Cash efficiency, I've talked about this in previous webinars. It's basically looking at my effects of my annual spending compared to the beginning balance and the ending balance. And what we find is that cash efficiency changes by phase of work. I have very poor or low cash efficiencies in the early stage. When I get to around remedy implementation, I start to get around 0. Finally, when I get to my closure or my long-term monitoring, I start to get to a 1. A 1 means every dollar I spend, it's reducing the reserve balance by about $1, right? So this is a metric you can use internally within your own portfolio, site-by-site comparisons, or you can compare it from company A to company B. We have 2 bubble charts here also that are examples that involve spend. The one on the left is a Pareto style analysis. So I've got spending on my x-axis and my reserve adjustments on my y, and the size of the bubble is the reserve balance. So I can easily look at my top 10 or my top 20%, and I can see these outliers, sites that I'm spending a lot of money on year to year that I'm also making big reserve adjustments or replenishments on that have a large balance, right? That's a Pareto style analysis. The one on the right is a site completion analysis. So I've got spend on my y-axis, and I've got the project count as the bubble. So I can see the relative nature of my spend per site as we go from year to year. All right, so let me jump through and just briefly talk about an exploration of data that we're doing with a customer. This is looking at spend per unit, and the unit here is the analyte unit on a plume average basis. And we started small. It's a 10-site sample. We use 2 years of data, financial and laboratory data. It's a mix of small, medium, and large sites. We used a target analyte benzene, and we used the average of all monitoring wells. But lo and behold, we're coming out with a very tight number here on annual cost per analyte unit. It's around $30 per unit. So this is a project that's just started. It's data exploration, which is part of business intelligence. It's going to be useful not only for business intelligence, but also for machine learning and AI into the future. So more investigation is going on right now around using this same type of analysis on life cycle phase spend data, different target analytes, mass flux and mass discharge through time as well. So we're always looking for the denominator, cost per something, right? in order to evaluate remediation performance. It could be cost per volume, cost per square foot, right, of an area of a plume. We think it's the answers, the more meaningful answers are going to be in analyte reduction through time, as well as average plume concentration moving towards the cleanup criteria objective. So these are all parts of this investigation that are still going on. So I'm going to wrap up, and any questions that are coming in, Mike, we're going to probably need to answer lately, or answer after the webinar, I should say. So these are deadly sins that we have seen: not prioritizing digital, not viewing workflow and data in an enterprise way, not aligning spend management with forecasting and budgeting, not collecting and tracking spend data at a granular enough level, and then wasting time and money analyzing data that's not uniform and it's been sourced from ad hoc systems and spreadsheets. And then finally, just your key takeaways. Oops, that was my mistake. Okay, monitor costs with a purpose and in a systematic way. Evaluate both spend efficiency measures and spend outcome measures, and we showed you several examples of both. And leverage enterprise digital technology to ensure that you're doing this in the most optimal way. And with that, I know we're going to bypass Q&A, but I'm going to hand it back over to Mike.
Yeah, I just thank everyone for joining. Like I said at the beginning, we did record the session. You'll be getting the recording as well as the slides by the end of today. And, you know, hopefully we piqued your curiosity. I mean, Roger and George really just scratched the surface. I would just emphasize that this is very tough to do if your data sets aren't already standardized and uniform across all projects. Very challenging to ensure that the data is accurate if you're using something like Excel. So a well thought out BI project includes data gathering and data preparation steps to build a strong foundation. And all of that is done automatically if you're using ENFOS. So if you're open to having additional conversation, you could either reach out to myself or Evan, and then we'll be following up as well to any questions we didn't get to after the fact. So thanks again, everybody, for joining. We hope you found it useful.
Thanks, everyone.